Drove to my son-in-law's law firm on a Tuesday morning with no plan other than to look him in the eye. I had rehearsed 100 different speeches in the car. By the time I pulled into the parking garage on 5th and Monroe, I couldn't remember a single word of any of them. What I found when I got there changed everything, not just about him, about my daughter, about a secret my family had been sitting on for 23 years, about me. Let me back up. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm 58 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the county. I coached Little League for a decade. I grilled hamburgers every 4th of July. And I genuinely believed, that I had built something solid. A life. A family. The kind of thing you're proud of when you sit on the porch at night and look out at the yard. My wife and I had one child, our daughter. She came into the world on a February morning in 1991 when the temperature outside was 11 degrees and the hospital heating was broken, and I held her wrapped in my coat because that's what you do. You protect what's yours. You keep it warm. That's the whole job. She grew up sharp and funny and a little stubborn, which she got from her mother, and I say that with nothing but love. She graduated near the top of her class, got into a good school in Ohio, came back home with a degree in communications and a boyfriend I didn't know what to make of at first. His name was Elliot. He was 29, already a junior associate at a downtown firm, pressed shirts, firm handshake, knew the right things to say at dinner. Her mother loved him immediately. I took a little longer. But he made my daughter happy. That was the thing. She laughed differently when he was around. Not louder, just easier, like something in her had unclenched. So I came around. I walked her down the aisle in 2017. I shook Elliot's hand at the reception and told him to take care of her, and he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Always." I believed him. The first sign that something was wrong came not from my daughter, but from a neighbor, our next-door neighbor, a retired postal worker named Dale, who had lived on our street for 40 years and knew everybody's business without ever meaning to. He mentioned, casually, over the fence one Saturday, that he'd seen my daughter's car parked in our driveway on a Wednesday afternoon for 3 hours while I was at a dentist appointment. That wasn't unusual by itself. What was unusual was that when I mentioned it to her on the phone that evening, she paused just a half second too long before saying, "Oh, I just stopped by to drop something off." She hadn't dropped anything off. I hadn't found anything, but I didn't push it. The second sign came from her mother, who noticed that my daughter had stopped mentioning Elliot in conversation. Not that she was complaining about him. She just stopped saying his name. When you've been married as long as we have, you notice those gaps. My wife said to me one night, "Something's going on with those two." I told her she was reading into things. I was wrong. The third sign was the one I couldn't ignore. I found a voicemail on my daughter's old phone, the one she'd left behind at our house when she upgraded. I wasn't snooping. I was trying to factory reset it so I could give it to my nephew. The voicemail had never been deleted. It was from a man whose name I didn't recognize, a man named Clifton, and what he said in that voicemail I will not repeat in full. But the meaning was clear enough. He and my daughter had been seeing each other. Had been, from the sound of it, for some time. He was asking her to meet him. His voice was calm and familiar, in a way that made my stomach turn, because you could hear in it that this wasn't new. This was settled. This was routine. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after that, the phone face down on the table, the refrigerator humming. Everything ordinary and nothing ordinary at all. I did not call my daughter that night. I did not call Elliot. I did not tell my wife because she has a heart condition and I have learned to be careful with what I put in front of her. I just sat there and thought about what a man is supposed to do when the thing he built starts to crack. By morning, I had made a decision. Not about the marriage. That wasn't mine to decide. What I decided was that I needed to look at this Clifton face to face. I needed to understand what kind of man walks into another man's family and does this. I needed, I think, to make it real, because sitting alone in your kitchen at 2 in the morning, these things feel like rumors about someone else's life. They don't feel like yours. I found Clifton through his voicemail greeting, which had given his last name. It took me about 20 minutes online to find that he was a partner at a small investment advisory firm across town. He had a LinkedIn profile with a professional photo. He looked about 45. Salt and pepper hair, square jaw, the kind of face that gets described as distinguished. He'd been married. I found a society page photo from 6 years ago, him and a woman at some charity gala. I didn't know if he still was. I drove to his office building on a Tuesday. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a while. I am not a confrontational man by nature. I coached Little League for 10 years, and in all that time I only argued with an umpire twice, and I felt bad about it both times. But I also know that there are moments in a man's life where you either move toward something or you spend the rest of your days wondering why you didn't. I took the elevator to the 14th floor. The firm's lobby was small and tasteful, dark wood, low lighting, a receptionist who looked up and smiled, the kind of professional smile that means nothing. I said I was there to see Clifton. She asked if I had an appointment. I said I didn't, that it was a personal matter. She picked up the phone, and then I heard a voice from down the hallway. Not Clifton's voice, a woman's voice. My daughter's voice. I turned and looked down the hall, and there was my daughter coming out of a conference room. She was mid-sentence, talking to someone behind her, laughing at something. She had a work bag over one shoulder and a coffee in her hand, and she looked, in that moment, so completely at ease that it knocked the wind out of me. Not because she was there with him, because she looked happy, because she looked like herself, like the version of herself I recognized from before all of this. And it hit me that I had not seen her look that way in months. She looked up and saw me. The color drained out of her face. Behind her, the man from the conference room stepped into the hallway. Clifton. Taller than his photo. He saw my daughter's expression, then saw me, and something shifted in his face too. Not guilt exactly. Something older than guilt. Something that looked almost like dread. The three of us stood there in that hallway for what felt like a very long time. My daughter said my name, just my name, the way she used to say it when she was small, and she'd done something she knew she'd have to answer for. I looked at Clifton, and Clifton looked at me, and then he said something I was not prepared for. He said, "Sir, I think you need to know something, and I'm sorry it's happening like this." I didn't know what that meant. I assumed he was going to try to explain or apologize or make some kind of case for himself. I had no interest in any of that. I opened my mouth to tell him so. But my daughter stepped forward and put her hand on my arm and said, "Dad, please, let's sit down." There was something in her voice I had never heard before. Not guilt, not fear. Something that sounded like relief. Like she had been waiting for this moment and was frightened of it and grateful for it at the same time. Like something that had been held under pressure for a very long time had finally been given permission to come up. We went into the conference room. My daughter closed the door. What she told me over the next 40 minutes rearranged everything I thought I knew. My daughter and Elliot had been struggling for 2 years. Not from lack of love, she said, but from something she hadn't known how to tell me. Elliot had been dealing with a serious addiction, prescription painkillers, which had started after a back surgery and had quietly consumed the last 3 years of their marriage. She had been covering for him, managing the finances, making excuses to family, going with him to appointments he stopped showing up to. She had been, she said, completely alone in it. She didn't tell me because she knew I would worry, because of her mother's health, because she didn't want to put that on us. She had been trying to handle it herself, and it was destroying her. Clifton was not her lover. He was her father's age, which I now understood in a way I hadn't from his photograph. He was her therapist's referral, a family friend of her therapist's who had gone through an almost identical situation with his own son and who had been meeting with my daughter informally as a kind of sponsor and advisor to help her understand what she was dealing with. The voicemail I'd found was about a support group meeting. The ease I'd seen between them in the hallway was the ease of someone who had helped her survive something. I sat with that for a minute, just sat with it. Then I asked the question I should have asked at the beginning, The one I'd been afraid of since I sat in my kitchen with that phone, face down on the table. Why didn't you come to me? She looked at her hands. Then she looked at me. She said, because you would have fixed it, Dad. You would have come in and tried to fix everything. And there are some things you can't fix. And I couldn't watch you try. That is the sentence I keep coming back to. I have turned it over in my mind every day since. Because she wasn't wrong. That is exactly what I would have done. That is what I have always done. I am a man who fixes things. Leaky faucets, broken fences, my nephew's alternator, the county's drainage systems. I have spent my whole life believing that the job of a father is to fix what is broken. But my daughter didn't need me to fix anything. She needed me to sit in a room and not leave. She needed me to say, I'm here, not I'll handle it. I drove home that day with all the windows down, even though it was February and 43 degrees. I needed to feel something cold and real. Elliot entered a residential treatment program in March. I did not know for 2 months after that conversation. My daughter told me when she was ready. I did not push. I waited and I let her lead. And that, I think, is the hardest thing I have ever done. Harder than any conversation I have had, any confrontation I braced for, any moment where I thought I needed to be the one with the plan. I visited Elliot once at the facility. My daughter didn't ask me to. I just went. I told the front desk I was family. They let me in. We sat in a common room with plastic chairs and a TV mounted too high on the wall, and I told him I wasn't there to say anything in particular, that I just thought someone should show up. He didn't say much. He looked thin and tired and young in a way I hadn't noticed before, the way people look when they've been stripped back to something basic. I shook his hand when I left. I didn't know if that was the right thing. I still don't. What I know is that I spent 30 years believing that being a father meant standing between my family and whatever was coming, building a wall, holding the line. I coached 11-year-olds to protect the base. Keep your eye on the runner. Cover your position. I thought that's what you did. You covered your position. But my daughter didn't need a wall. She needed a door left open. There is no clean ending here. Elliot is still in recovery. My daughter is still figuring out what her marriage looks like on the other side of all this. Some days it sounds like they are going to make it. Some days I'm not sure. I don't ask. I've learned to stop asking and start listening, which at 58 is a harder thing to teach yourself than you'd think. Clifton, the man I drove across town to confront, sent me a message 3 weeks after that day in the hallway. He said he was glad I had come, even accidentally. He said sometimes the things we stumble into are exactly where we needed to be. I thought that was a strange thing to say from a man I barely knew. Then I thought about it for a week and decided he was right. I still grill hamburgers on the 4th of July. My daughter comes over. Last summer she brought Elliot, and he sat in a lawn chair and watched the kids from next door run through the sprinkler. And he looked, I don't know how else to say it, like a man trying to find his way back to something. I know what that looks like. I have been doing the same thing. I put a burger on his plate without being asked. He said, thank you. I said, of course. That's the whole story. That's all of it. There are things I wish I'd done differently. I wish I'd been the kind of father my daughter felt she could come to. I wish I had understood earlier that being present is not the same as being useful. I wish I had known that the bravest thing a man can do is sometimes nothing. Just sit in the room, keep the door open, and let the people he loves find their way back to him. I didn't know that at 50. I'm learning it at 58. Maybe that's how it goes. Maybe that's what all of this was for. I keep thinking about the drive home. Windows down, February cold coming in hard, and me not caring at all. I needed something to cut through the numbness. That's the honest truth of it. I had gone to that office building believing I was the one who had something to say. I had rehearsed it. I had built up a version of Clifton in my head. Some careless man who had walked into my family's life without a second thought, and I had been ready to stand in front of that version and say my piece. What I found instead was my own daughter. Exhausted, relieved, carrying something she had been too afraid to hand to me. That's the part I sit with most. Not Elliot's addiction, not the months of secrets, not even the voicemail that started all of it. It's the fact that my daughter looked at the man who had been her father for 33 years and decided he couldn't handle the weight of it. She made that calculation. And when I'm being honest with myself, the kind of honest that only comes at 2 in the morning when the house is quiet, I understand exactly why she made it. There's a version of strength that looks like protection but is really just control. I built walls my whole life and called it love. I coached 11-year-olds to cover their positions. I fixed everything that broke within a 20-foot radius of my house, and I genuinely believed that's what a good man does. He handles it. He steps in front of it. He makes sure the people he loves never have to feel the weight of a hard thing. But my daughter didn't need me to lift the weight. She needed me to stand next to her while she carried it herself. There is a difference, and I did not understand that difference until I was 58 years old. Sitting in a conference room with bad lighting and plastic water bottles on the table, listening to my child explain why she had kept me at arm's length through the hardest years of her life. What I've come to understand is this: the choices we make under pressure reveal what we actually believe, not what we say we believe. My daughter believed for 2 years that honesty with me would cost her more than silence would. That didn't happen by accident. That was the result of every time I jumped in too fast, every time I turned her problems into my projects, every time I made it clear, without meaning to, that I needed to be the one with the answer. Her silence was a mirror. I just hadn't been looking at it. And Elliot, that young man sitting in a plastic chair in a treatment facility, looking thin and stripped down to something basic, he made choices too. Choices that compounded quietly over years until they became a crisis no one could manage alone. I don't say that with judgment. I say it because I've lived long enough to know that most of the hard situations people end up in didn't arrive all at once. They arrived one small compromise at a time, one avoided conversation at a time, one moment of choosing the easier thing when the harder thing was what was needed. What pulls people through, what actually pulls them through, isn't cleverness or good luck or the right words said at the right moment. It's the willingness to keep showing up after you've been wrong, to sit in the room, to stay at the table, to put a burger on someone's plate without making them ask. That quiet persistence, that refusal to let the people you love disappear from your life just because things got complicated, that is the real work. That is what I am still learning to do. I'm not a perfect father. I never was. But I drove to that office building looking for someone to blame, and I came home understanding something about myself instead. That's not nothing. At 58, maybe that's everything.